Rachel here with Ari, and we're your hosts for the Merry Writer podcast. This week we're on episode 246, and we're asking which is stronger, the beginning, the middle, or the end? Before we start, if you enjoy the show, consider checking out our coffee page. You can follow the page for free as we have plenty of goodies for all. If you're feeling generous, a one-off donation will get you access to a few more treats, or you can become a Merry Writer for just $2 a month. For this, you can get access to all the items in our shop, including exclusive goodies and access to bonus episodes. And it all helps support the podcast. If that's not your style, but you still enjoy the show, then please subscribe wherever you're listening if you're not already, and consider dropping us a like on YouTube. So this week we are talking about beginnings, middles, and ends. Every book has a beginning and an ending, and of course a middle, because how else do you get from the starting point to the finish line? I think when we first decided to have this topic on the podcast, it was because we wanted to discuss our favorite parts to write, but I guess we can do a little more digging into it and, talk about beginning, middles, and ends as a whole before we talk about our opinions. So what better place to start than the beginning, which is the opening, the hook, the reason your reader wants to keep turning the pages. Call it whatever you want. The purpose is to introduce the main character and world without info dumping. But of course, if you're writing a first draft, info dump all you want. You got to get it all out. But also the beginning is the time to establish the main conflict or, some sort of situation that leads to the main conflict. In other words, the beginning lets your readers know what they're getting into without spoiling anything so that they'll want to get into it, being warped to this world and go on this journey with your characters. Now, for me, I think the beginning is my least favorite to read and to write, which I know sounds weird, but as a reader, I feel like the beginning can often be quite slow because of the introductions, and it's needed. I'd be lost without it, but I also just want to know everything right away. That's just me. I feel the same way when I watch movies. Like the first movie is always slower than the rest of the movies in the series because by the time you get to the second movie, you already know the main characters. Everything's already established. Now you just need to jump into a new plot. And it's the same thing with books. The first book, the beginning of every book, it's just naturally slower. And I don't know, I just want to jump into it. Again, it's all needed information, but I digress. But as a writer, I don't like writing the beginning. And it's usually because I don't know where to start, or I don't think my beginning is good enough, because figuring out that hook for the reader is really stressful.
I agree. It really is. I don't like writing the beginning. It's not my worst part, but I just don't like it. And I don't write it first because I don't write linearly. I hate this word. Because I don't write in a straight line from beginning to end. I always leave it till like halfway through the manuscript before I go back to it. And I recently just finished going through my manuscript and getting it to a good level. And I had to rewrite the first chapter like 3 times because it's a weird balance is the beginning. And by the beginning, this part I'm talking about is just the first chapter, because you have to grab the reader early, but at the same time, you're supposed to be laying foundations. You're supposed to be showing the character in their regular life how things are normally before you hit them in the face with an inciting incident. We watched Frodo and Gandalf at the party of Bilbo Baggins, just, celebrating a birthday. That's kind of pretty typical. And then it moved on to, oh, there's a ring and some riders and, oh my God, run. But you had to get the story and the this is what it's like in the Shire. And it's like that with so many books and movies, you have to set it up. So it's almost like a weird conflict because you've got this kind of, I don't want to say boring, but you've got this steady, this is what life is like for this character. They're just living their life, they're doing their shit, and here's something that's going to mess it up. That's what an inciting incident does. It throws a big spanner in the works. But at the same time, it's got to be interesting enough to make the person read through the chapter, and sometimes 2 chapters. And as I said, my first chapter I wrote, my alpha reader was like, first of all, you've info dumped. And I didn't even realize how bad I had done that. I just crammed so much information. And I appreciate this podcast have talked about not doing that. And, we need to take our own advice. Sometimes you don't even realize it. But there was no setup of what the person's life was like, their regular life. And I had to go back and remember to do that, but also make it hopefully interesting, So I think that's why a lot of people don't like the beginning. It's such a balancing act. Obviously, the beginning also does include the inciting incident. That's like the end of the beginning section, Act 1-ish. Correct. Yeah. So we've got inciting incident, and then we've got rising action, and that's where the beginning finishes. So it does get better, and I think it gets easier to write the beginning. But yeah, I think most writers will probably struggle with that.
I mean, yeah, you are supposed to establish their life, but there's also so many rules that goes along with writing the beginning, because it's such a cliche to have your main character wake up as the opening line, the opening paragraph, the first chapter. And there's only so many ways that you can do it, because there are so many tropes, and we've talked about this before. There are no real unique story ideas anymore. It's all like the same foundation, and we just kind of warp it however we want. And it's so difficult to make it unique enough that for the readers to actually continue reading. And with the info dumping thing, again, for the first draft, you absolutely should info dump. I know it would be a pain later on for editing, but you got to tell yourself the story, and you got to make sure you establish absolutely every little detail for yourself so that you know what's needed and what's not needed.
That's true. That is true. What I found was I was struggling so badly with it. I pulled like 4 or 5 of my favorite novels, and I reread the first chapter to get my head into what they were like. Like I picked Heartless by Marissa Meyer, which is like a Red Queen retelling, as in, sorry, yes, yeah, Red Queen from Alice in Wonderland. It's like how she became the Queen of Hearts and everything. And her first chapter is literally her baking tarts. And then, but then there's other ones where Shadowfall by James Clemens, it literally starts with a guy getting beaten up outside of a tavern. and all this, and like how that's what happens to him a lot. And I just read through like I think I've written about 4 books, and I just read the first chapters, and it was shocking because it's so stupid. I read all the time, and it's almost like it doesn't always go in that the beginning is this setting the scene of this is what it's like, and this character's day. She's starting a bakery, she's making tarts for a royal ball, and she's just really unhappy with how she's making them, and this guy is getting beaten up in the because he got kicked out of the tavern because he doesn't have enough money. That's his life. He's kind of down on his luck. And it was an interesting thing. And it's like, wow, why am I struggling so badly? Why do I think I need to do this and this and this? And I just made a mess of it. So if you're ever struggling with your first beginning of your story, because let's be honest, the inciting incident is usually quite easy to write, I believe. Might be, but I think that's an easy part to read. The beginning before that is difficult. If you're not sure, pick up several books and just read the first chapters. I know you can get swept up, but just read the first chapters and see what information they give you. What do they start with? What info do they give that's not dumped? It should never be dumped. As Rachel said, you can dump at the beginning, but then you need to sort of like filter it through.
That's a good idea. I never really thought to do that before, so there's a little homework for all of you. Give it a try. I will be. Actually, no, not even homework. We just gave you a whole brand new rabbit hole to go down.
That's it. It was hard just trying to read the first chapter and not carry on. I kept like, put the book down, put it down, and can I get another one? Do not start reading. But yeah, let's move on to the middle, which is my favorite section. Not. The middle, obviously, is the path that takes your readers from, the beginning to the end. It's that nice bridge. If you're thinking of the the 3-act structure, it's the rising action, and then you're hitting the climax. Okay, or the midpoint. Yeah, rising action, midpoint, try and fail, things like that. And honestly, it's good for character development. It's good to move the story along. Like if they're journeying, that's when the journey, starts, and then you've got to sort of push through whatever the journey is before you hit this climax thing. And honestly, I hate the middle because I really suffer from sagging middle syndrome, physically and in my writing. And we have discussed this in episode 145. Thank you, Rachel, for adding that, because I would never have remembered which episode it was.
Apparently, episode 145 was January 2023. And I mean, like, the first week of January. It was January 4th.
No, seriously.
It was so long ago. It's probably a horrible episode. You probably don't want to listen to it.
I don't know. I honestly, when I read that, I was like, oh, 145. Yeah, that's like this January. Not last January. Oh my gosh.
We're already, I mean, this is what, episode 246? So yeah, we're already, it's 100 episodes later.
Wow, yeah. Wow, it's just flying through.
It's weird.
Anyway, what we're talking about. Yeah, sagging middles. I think the middles can be quite useful for some people. I think it's kind of the meat of the story. It's when you bring more characters in. Sometimes that's when you start introducing a villain if you haven't introduced them earlier on, or an antagonist. It's also the try and fail. You know, the if it's like the hero's journey, they're gonna hit an obstacle. They're gonna try really hard. They're gonna fail miserably. They're gonna hit that like dark side where they're like, I can't do it. I'm rubbish. Before the usually a mentor dies, something like that, before they start surging up towards the climax of the story. So I can imagine there's going to be a lot of people who are like, I love right in the middle, but I just don't. I find if I'm going to find a pothole to fall through, or I'm going to lose thread of a story idea or an arc for one of my characters, it's going to be in the middle. That's where it's going to be. Usually 3/4 of the way through the book, and so it's the end of the middle. That's where I mess up. So I get really anxious right in the middle. It's not my favorite part at all.
The middle is hard. I will admit that it is a difficult part of the book to get through, especially when writing. And obviously, it's probably the most important because that's when everything happens. You get the climax, and I mean, you have all those life lessons that the characters learn, the character development, continuous world building, all that fun stuff. So it's a pretty chunky part. I mean, really, you think of beginnings. Beginnings can be like chapters 1, 2, maybe 3, and then the ending can be like the last like 2 or 3 chapters, I guess. And then you could also throw in a prologue and an epilogue for good measure, but we're not talking about prologues and epilogues. The middle is just the rest of the book, and it could very easily be like 150, 200 pages of the book, and it's a lot of writing. And even though it is hard, I have to, be the opposite of Ari and say that I kind of enjoy writing the middle, especially in the first draft, because again, you can info dump and I could just take my time getting from point A to point B. When I was writing The Perfect Alibi, there was like 5 chapters where nothing happened because I didn't know how to get to the next part. I knew what was supposed to happen next, but I didn't know how to get my characters there. So I just kept writing. And there's literally 5 chapters of them doing nothing. And it's like 5 chapters of like, I don't know, 1,000, 2,000 words. Like they're solid chapters. But it was nice for me to write it because I knew I'm just gonna take it out anyway. Because during editing, you just figure out what's important, what's funny, what's definitely needed, what's not needed, and just take out or keep in whatever. But as a reader, as long as there's not too much filler or needless narrative, I do enjoy reading the overall journey up until the end, because of course that's what the middle is there for. The middle, as Ari explained, is the meat of the story. But it also does depend on the writing style and the characters, how relatable and likable they are, and just the overall plot and the book as a whole. So, I mean, it kind of depends as a reader, because some books you're gonna love, some books you're not gonna love, and that's just the way it goes.
I think with the middle section, if you're a writer, it can be very useful to divide it in two. Because I know you've got the 3-act structure, and they're not equal, aren't the 3 acts? It's not like, the first third of the book is Act 1, the second third is Act 2, and the third, the last third is Act 3. It's more like a quarter of the book is Act 1, and a quarter of the book is Act 3, and the rest is Act 2. So it's a good idea to actually split it in two. That's what I found can help against sagging middle, because I think what happens is people go, oh my gosh, here's the inciting incident, and here's some rising action. There's your Act 1, and then obviously the end is like, oh my gosh, you've just had the climax, whoever's won has won, and then we're kind of coming down into the resolution of where the world and the characters are now. Usually it's the opposite of how it began. They were living quietly and quaintly in some little village. I guarantee they're not doing that again at the end. They've been crowned king or something, I don't know. So you've got this big chunky section in the middle, and yes, there are moments of doubt. There are the character might turn away and be like, yeah, I'm just giving up. Somebody might die. And I think the problem is, if you're writing it can become a big chunky piece to the point where you add too much filler, like Rachel said, to kind of get to from like A to C. but it's not. It's A to E, and there's lots of other letters in the middle, and you need to make sure there's enough things happening in the middle to give you this nice plot. It's not three. It's not like 1, 2, 3, or A, B, C, I should say. It's not A, B, C. It's definitely not. There's a lot more going on in the middle. And I think that's what can be the issue. And it doesn't sound as interesting, does it? As like you've got inciting incident, you've got climax and resolution. The middle, it's like the midpoint. You know, it's like, it doesn't sound that interesting. And yet it's technically scaling the mountain. So yeah, it's I think there'll be more people who struggle with the middle. I'm gonna put that out there. I think a lot of writers are going to struggle with the middle. Please put comments in down below wherever it is you're listening. If you can put comments, I know not everywhere you can put comments, or find us on like Instagram and tell us, because I'd like to know if the middle point is hard for everyone, or if it's just me.
No, it's not just you. It's hard. And I mean, like I said, sometimes you just have to write in that filler to kind of figure things out as you're going along. Yeah, I mean, I don't even know what to say because you just explained it really well, and it's a hard thing to get through. And I think that's part of one of the reasons why not every writer finishes every novel that they start. They get to a certain point in the middle and they realize, I don't know where to go next, so I'll just set it aside and take a break. And that break lasts like 5 years. Not that there's anything wrong with that, but it's just one of those things. I think we all go through it. It's a very relatable thing. If you do happen to get through the middle, now you're at the end of the book. And like all good things, it must come to an end. And of course, this is the resolution of not just the story, but also the character development. Because the protagonist and obviously some of the other characters should be very different now than they were at the beginning. And the ending can also just be a nice wrap up, or it can be a nice cliffhanger, assuming there will be a sequel. I personally love reading the endings of books, and especially if it's something that if it's a book that I really love, you get that feeling that you don't want it to end, but the ending is still good to get through, and I don't know, it's just there's something emotional about it, whether you want it to end or you don't. I just really like endings. I like seeing the wrap up and the aftermath of the book's events. Like, I enjoy watching the characters grow and change. But writing the end, no. I can never figure out a solid way to end my books without it sounding lame. It always sounds lame, unless I have a sequel in mind, and then I have a difficult time creating a good the end. And I think that's probably why I tend to write more series than I do standalones, because it just makes things easier for me if I don't have to have like a solid ending, because there's more to the story. Then it's like I don't worry too much about it. But if I'm putting like a brick wall down and saying, okay, you got a hard stop here, I don't know how to. I don't know. It sounds lame.
I'm the opposite. I almost always have the ending in my head when I come up with the story. It's like I'll get a character idea or a snippet of dialogue, and then as I start molding it with brainstorming, I will almost always have the ending. It might not be very fully fleshed, but it's like, okay, this is where some of the characters are going to be. Not everybody, not the whole arc, but this is where some of the characters are going to be. And then I kind of work towards that.
I have an idea of where all the characters and how the book is going to end as well. But when it comes to actually writing the ending, it always sounds so abrupt. I know how it's going to end, but the actual writing of it sounds stupid. And it sounds like out of left field. And it's just like, I don't know how to like end it in a flowy, good way.
Is that real, or is that you in your own head thinking that, and everyone else will be like, what are you talking about? It's fine. Yeah, there
probably.
Yeah. No, I think the endings obviously it's the good parts where things start like come together and you get to like tie everybody's tie stories together or leave more breadcrumbs leading into the next book, things like that can be quite helpful. Yeah, I'd like to say that like writing the end is like the best ever, but it does have its own pitfalls. I mean, I've read some books where it was almost as if some of the writers wanted to make sure that the ending had such a pop that the rest of the book had a very specific pace and a very specific feel, and then we got towards like the last quarter of the book, and these people, some of these writers, have literally cranked it up by about 1,000 to the point where it's like, okay, that's quite intense and shocking and like dun dun dun, but it feels so at odds with the rest of the book And I think that's what can make you worried about how you write the ending, because it's like, are you going to go too far and be like, look at all this incredible stuff happening at once? It's like, yeah, but you didn't build up to any of that stuff, you know? That's like we're having a little tiny battle, and then suddenly they're bringing tanks, and everyone was fighting with like muskets and swords, and now they've got tanks with laser guns. It feels like that sometimes. So yeah, it can be difficult, or the other way, as you said, like where you feel like, oh, it's so lame, it's not strong enough to carry the story. And I have to admit, my current one was I felt a bit like that, and then my alpha reader notes were like, I'm not sure. So I had to tweak it. And it's still, I don't think it's a massively strong ending, but I think it fits with the book and I'm happy enough with it. So I think you definitely need to have an idea of where your book is going to write the ending well, and not just have that kind of panic that a lot of people do, where it's like, I better throw everything I've got at it. It's like, yeah, but you didn't plan for that, you know? It's like, if I go back to Lord of the Rings, I know I use it all the time. Imagine if the journey had very little, you know, there was no race, there was no Balrog, there was no I think all the other things. Give me a minute.
Nature.
You know, there was no nature, there's no orcs or anything attacking. You know, if it was just them going, there was just a little bit of like, well, there's a river, there's a bit of a mountain. That was it. And then right at the end, it's like, okay, we're gonna have these kind of bad guys and these kind of bad this, oh my god, and then through everything that happened throughout the rest of the book and put it all at the end. It would be too much. And I think sometimes the ends can be a bit panicky when you're writing. You can feel like I better put a lot at the end, and it can be a bit overwhelming and a bit like, not sure about that. So
no, I actually agree with that. I think it's true. When you do get to the end of your book, you feel like, did I say everything that needed to be said? And then you kind of shoehorn in extras because you start panicking that like either the ending's not good enough, or you think that the middle wasn't good enough, and you're gonna feel like the ending was like out of left field and abrupt. And I get that. No, that's a real feeling. But also I realized the title of this episode is which is stronger, the beginning, the middle, or end. And I mean, we just kind of talked about them as a whole and said what we prefer to read and write. But I think if we're gonna answer that overarching question, I feel like you could probably say that the middle is probably the strongest of the book, because that's where everything happens. And I know that sounds like such a obvious answer, but I think we can all agree that the middle is the strongest part. So if you're gonna give one part of your story more attention than the other two, probably should be the middle, right?
yeah, I think the middle, the end, then the beginning, because the beginning has to do something. The end has to grab you as well. It has to be satisfying in some way. But the middle, as you say, because it's the biggest part, it's going to have more things happening. But in the end, I think there needs to be a nice balance. I think when you look at the book, you need to look at the story as a whole and make sure that yes, the middle's going to have like a lot of going on, but it needs to be balanced enough with the other two. It still will have more, but it definitely needs to have a balance, so it's not just like nothing. Everything happens. Nothing. Wow, why do we even write books? This seems so complicated.
I don't know. I don't know why we started it, but you know what? I'm actually going to leave you guys with that, because Ari basically did the wrap up for me, and she said it very nicely right before she asked that question. Before we leave, if you want to learn more about us, the podcast, and opportunities to be a guest on the show, don't forget to check out our Podbean website at themerrywriterpodcast.podbean.com. So now we're going to actually turn it over to you guys and let us know in the comments what your favorite part of the novel to write is and which you prefer to read. And I don't know, do you agree with everything that we said, or do you have anything to add? Just let us know and we can chat about it in the comments. Remember, we release a new episode every Wednesday. Next week, we're discussing finishing your manuscript. To ensure you don't miss it, don't forget to hit the subscribe button on your way out. And as always, thank you for listening to the Merry Writer Podcast. We'll see you guys next week. This podcast is brought to you by Stuffed Bookshelves. Our TBR piles are huge. The music, titled Inspired, is by Kevin MacLeod, licensed under Creative Commons 4.0.